Hi there. I'm Dr. Iles for Aspire English. If you want to find out more about what we're talking about today, hit us up on WeChat. We're here to help. I was looking at the recent writing test from the last exam and looking at the task two writing component, and I just wanted to give a couple of key things here that I thought might be helpful for people that are dealing with that. So let me share my screen with you if you don't mind. Here's the prompt basically and the directive. And so one of the things I want you to consider is that task two and task one, obviously in writing, both are made up of what we call a prompt, which is the topic, basically what we're going to be talking about in the paper, and what we call a directive, and which is basically the directions of how we are going to talk about that thing. In task two, one of the things that we're looking for in our first category in the marking criteria for examiners is something that's called a task response. Basically, how well do you respond to what is in the task? And one of the easiest things I would suggest doing is to become familiar with the different types of tasks that are available for IELTS. The range is actually pretty narrow, uh, coming from things like an argumentative essay, a discursive essay, cause and effect, or reason and result. And so they have sort of unique formats for the way that we process that information for the examiner. Remember, IELTS writing is designed to look like something that will be used in the academic setting of a university. And so it's not exactly an academic paper per se, but it's kind of like a sample of one, I would suggest. It's only about 250 words. Normally, there are 4 or 5 paragraphs put together. We actually call them blocking, to be honest with you, because we don't indent them. And blocking is a good way to think about the structure or the format for writing in this case. So going back to our idea here of what I said before, of identifying what we call the prompt, which is the technical term for this part of the task two writing, which basically again is your sort of topic, what you're going to be talking about. Seems pretty obvious. And don't mind my notes. I'm using my mouse to write today, so don't be too critical. Remember, I got bad handwriting, but I'm a great house teacher in this case. The other part here is, of course, the directive, or which is sounds like directions, and so that should be pretty easy to understand that that's basically how we are going to be talking about this topic. And so the key here is depending on the format of where you find the topics, oftentimes they are solicited from candidates as they leave the testing center. A lot of other training centers in China go out and sort of try to get as much information about the exam in the hopes that they'll learn something that they can pass on to their students. The problem with that is it's sort of a cut and paste sort of situation. And so one of the reasons why 5.5 is such a popular writing band in China is that a lot of the content that is produced in the academic test by students is virtually the same. There's not a lot of original ideas dealing with these prompts and directives because most students will memorize sort of large sections of writing just like they would if they were going to take a test for the high school or for university like Gaokao. And so it's judged differently. And so it has a different response style. But when you come to IELTS, you got to change your approach. You have to totally change the way you're thinking about it because it's very specialized. And so one of the things we do is provide some kind of analysis when I'm working with students, in this case, looking at something like a prompt in task two, and this is a hot prompt that came out of last weekend's test. We can sort of isolate the topic very quickly and begin to sort of provide some analysis and then go to the next part here, which is our directive, which is what we're supposed to do with this. And so I'll tell you that the language has changed over the years, but fundamentally, the functions of the prompts have remained the same, or I should say the directives for the prompts. Definitely topics get updated because things change. And so as you can see, we've got a lot of information here about being online or the aspect of technology sort of influencing people's personal and private information. We've seen some variations of this in the past. It's pretty straightforward in this case. And then the task response, which you're going to be judged on in this particular prompt for the directive here, for the response, is this a positive or negative development? Now, remember, for a lot of mid band candidates for me are people that sometimes score 5, 6, and 7. And that's really where my focus is the most, because this is where I can make the biggest difference for students, uh, pushing them up between a band to 2 bands or even a band to half, somewhere between 5, 5.5 to a 7. And 7 is a decent academic score for most people that are going to study. Granted, for some people that maybe are doing postgraduate or doctor, they may need 7 plus in different areas because those programs are much more competitive. But for most of our students who are thinking about studying overseas, and that's coming, it's happening. Don't be surprised that those sort of restrictions that we've endured for the last almost 3 years are going to change. And so there's no choice. And so things will have to progress, and students will have to continue to go and study overseas if they want to try to carve out some sort of success for themselves that is different than their peers. And so it can happen, I suppose. Anyway, the language has changed over the years, dealing with, is this a positive or negative development? And for someone that's in the mid-band area, I would suggest it's probably better and faster and easier to just focus on a singular position and develop it pretty thoroughly. I think because of Chinese conversation communication strategies, where we tend to try to give very sort of balanced answers, in most cases, that's sort of the natural default or response for Chinese candidates, is they always want to sort of discuss things because that's sort of the reality of the issue. If we looked at it for ourselves, is it could be a little bit of a positive and it could also be a little bit of a negative. And so there's both of that. Cambridge is very smart when they designed this, because basically that means that for all the people around the world that are taking the test, some of them may argue one way and some may argue the other way, and some may sort of put it in the middle, which is kind of what we call the Mao Mao Hu Hu response, meaning that in this process that you turn this into a discursive essay. I don't recommend that. I think it's much easier and much faster to choose a singular position, make it very strong, and give some clear-cut examples and exemplify your points. And that may take some practice, and that's why people come and study with us, because we give them a lot of practice and we give them a lot of topic development. And really what we're trying to do is change their thinking about IELTS, giving them something that they cannot get anywhere else. And so we're always constantly updating our test banks, updating our corpus, updating our research and analysis about strategies and skills that are going to be useful for those students that want to get into the 6.5 to 7 area. And so our approach is very different, because we want our students, our candidates at Aspire, to be extremely unique when they sit in front of an examiner or when they turn in their writing as well. We want them to sort of stand out from the competition. And I will tell you, as a former IELTS examiner who did high volume for 3.5 years, if I did 20 interviews, would probably 90% of them, people would say the same things. And a lot of it's overused nonsense. And so there's a lot of bad advice about what to say. And sometimes it's about what not to say. Same thing for the writing. If I sat down in the writing room and was given, probably whatever 60 or 70 task 2 papers to mark, I would also say probably about 90% of them virtually the same concepts or same ideas. Not a lot of good sort of ideas, word usage, language uses, and definitely usually off the task response, because most people are naturally going to want to say that it's positive and negative. And ultimately, that's probably the real choice of the answer if you were answering this in a longer form. But for IELTS, it's not necessary, especially if you're in the mid band and you're only going to a 7. There's no need to try to force yourself into doing a lot of things with your lexical resource, the language that you have, trying to present a balanced discussion between the positive and the negative here. Leave that for the people that are higher bands, for instructors, for the books and so forth, as sort of like the ideal model. I want to work on a practical model, something that you can use. And my suggestion always is developing momentum when you are writing. That means you've got to get something on the page. You've only got 60 minutes, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone by writing rooms and the exam and look at the invigilator kind of checking things around the room and looking at some student kind of not sure where to start and how to approach these ideas because maybe they're missing some vocabulary or they just, as they often tell me in interviews, I never thought about that. Well, that can be kind of scary. So my suggestion to you is actually what I do. I actually don't even think about the issue here because I already know what my objective here is, which is I just want to start my introduction as fast as possible, between 3 and 5 minutes. I'm not even going to think about what I'm doing until I finish my directive and then start my other support blocking because I know that's what I have to do. I have to choose a position here. In this case, again, because I'm between 5, 6, and 7, it'll be much easier if I choose a singular position and try to develop it as thoroughly as possible. Then I can focus on the other important parts, such as my coherence, my cohesion, my use of paraphrase, my grammar structures, including 1 or 2 complex compound sentences. It's okay to write short, direct, exact sentences with good structure. I encourage that. It's very different than what we do in China for other exams, but we have to make that separation. Check out, we have to separate those 2 functions. And so what we're doing here is specifically for IELTS writing in this case. And so even before I even kind of look at the issue here, all I'm going to do is just start by paraphrasing because that's one of the things we have to do for lexical resources. We have to paraphrase successfully. And doing it in writing will also help you to do this in speaking. And so the more that you can do this and more that you can demonstrate this, it's going to show a greater range of language. And so for these people that run out and think lexical resource is just about vocabulary and try to hit the academic word list and try to onboard 8,000 vocabulary words in a short period of time, trust me, they always end up at 5.5 because they cannot manage their vocabulary or lexical resource correctly. You can still get a 7 with only about 4 to 5,000 words in English if you know how they function when they are a noun, when they are a verb, when they are an adjective, when they are an adverb, or if they have that function at all. They might only function in one place. The other key component here is even though we have 27 tenses in English, for IELTS at a 7, we just have to have good control over sort of the primary 12, dealing with our past tense, our present tense, our continuous tense, and our future tense, and of course the different versions of past perfect, present perfect, etc. Does take practice. We know that there's a handful of things that Chinese students always have difficulty with because it's a part of English that doesn't appear in Chinese in any form. And so we have to adapt to it. We have to accept it. And that's part of changing your mind or changing your way of thinking about IELTS is that you're going to have to learn some new things, which is always difficult because the last thing you want to do is more study and more homework. So hopefully what I'm doing is saving you time is what I hope. So we'll see. So let's paraphrase this really quickly if we can. So let me just hit the pause button and I'll do that and I'll come right. Okay, let's take a look at the paraphrase of the prompt or the topic. Again, we just want to change it substantially enough so we didn't copy it. And obviously, we want to demonstrate some range of lexis by using synonyms or alternative ways of expressing the idea. Remember, English is not a perfect language. It's just a popular language. And it's also a fat language like me in the sense that we have a lot of different ways to say the same thing. And so if that's the case, that's one of the things that they're measuring to see what language that you have. And so something like today, many people put their personal and private information online, address, phone number, and credit card number to facilitate everyday activities such as banking, shopping, and socializing. And so that's just the topic. It's pretty big, it's broad. People write a lot of information about that. But that's not our objective. Our objective here is just to paraphrase this very quickly and then move into a sort of turning the directive into a thesis to give us control of the blocks that we're going to build to support our idea once we choose that position. So in the prompt here, I just took just some simple pieces here, and obviously it's pretty easy to change today into something like currently. things like many people to a lot of online users only because I've read the whole prompt here and I know that they're talking about people using things online. And so I've just sort of changed the syntax here and put it over here with my other part of the subject. So currently a lot of online users post their private, this should be dashed here, sorry, private and personal information such as their data related to their residence. In this case, that would be what? That would be sort of related to their address, their phone contact details, that's their phone number, and even credit card numbers, which I lumped in together here as even credit or banking information in order to carry out their day-to-day activities. And so that's our everyday activities. And so there's another example of paraphrase is good. And then the list here, I just sort of mixed up. Things like instead of putting an order here, banking, shopping, socializing, I just mixed it up and changed it to shopping, managing finances, which is part of banking, and even how they socialize with others, which is, taking the continuous form here and breaking it down into the different form of the word. And so this is a good example of why word formation is important, because we need to know how words like this, especially keywords or special words, change in their function when they are being talked about in IELTS. And so it's important to demonstrate that. And so again, when I'm doing this, I am, again, not too concerned about the directive immediately. All I'm focusing on is the language. And so that's one of the things I think that people sometimes may forget is that IELTS itself, the International English Language Testing System, is a standardized test. And in order to be standard, they have to come up with some certain types of measurement and rules and benchmarks. And those are the things that we need to produce as objectives in order to score higher in IELTS. And oftentimes those are overlooked because people are using the wrong approach to this exam, in the sense that they think, well, I'll just memorize this and try to write it down. And so it becomes very messy or very sloppy. It's much better to have some sort of direct strategy that we can use and that we know that we'll get something on paper. And again, once you practice this by looking at a lot of these and sort of redoing them for yourself, you'll also become familiar with the pattern of the types of things that they're asking, especially for the task response here, which is important because that is the first score that we look at, is that did you do your job? And so the job here, of course, is this a positive or negative development? In reality, and IELTS is not reality. It's completely made up. We know that because they make things up all the time. And I would also say that a lot of times they are erroneous or false, and basically they're lying to you. Not on purpose per se, but for the purpose of the exam. And so that means that you also can make things up and also lie about certain situations, because you're going to focus on the language, not so much arguing or discussing what you think is in your heart or your sort of value system until you get enough language to express that correctly and completely. Please don't do that. Just go through the function of the language here and develop some skills in order to change these prompts very quickly. And so now you're already on the page here with about 20 or 25 words. Now, this particular directive here, we're going to need some kind of thesis statement. Now, this isn't a true or a traditional thesis statement, but for IELTS, this is a relatively working model in this case. And so is this a positive or negative development? Does it matter which one we choose? Actually, no, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what position that we can support with our language. And so you might want to give a little quick analysis to yourself and think, are there more positives or are there more negatives in this situation of putting your private information online? And again, in reality, that would be sort of a mixed response. Please don't do that in IELTS for 5, 6, and 7. Just give a single response and take a chance in the sense that you have to choose a position. One of my philosophies about IELTS is that it always requires choices. And the challenge for us is making those choices in real time as we are doing the exam. So how do we do that? How do we manage that? Well, it takes the practice. And so if you're practicing doing a lot of these paraphrases for a task 2 and working with your prompts, you'll become familiar with the pattern. The other bonus part about this is that you should be doing a lot of model reading. You should be looking at past models of topics from task 2. That should be your reading input. That also should be where you're drawing most of your vocabulary for the exam itself in all 4 papers. And so, again, to run out and try to learn a bunch of other words that may not necessarily apply to the exam is wasting your time. I love Chinese students. They work hard, but sometimes they don't work smart because whoever taught them is teaching them something else. They're not teaching them IELTS. And so in this case, we want to work smart. We want to develop different types of approaches and strategies. So when you go in the exam, you have confidence, you have control, you have the experience of a seasoned examiner and second marking, and someone who's been teaching this for nearly 20 years. I will give you all the information that I have. And I'm telling you, this system works. That's why I developed it. And so again, the prompt here is done. And so now we're going to do the directive. So give me just a moment to rephrase that. All right, Dr. Isles is back with his directive here. It has been turned into sort of a thesis statement. And so asking, is this a positive or negative development? Again, because we're in the mid-band 5, 6, and 7, we're going to choose a single position because it's easier to do and to write and to manage and to control for the purpose of mid-band. If you're beyond mid-band and you think you have a high Lexis and you have experience with this, then by all means, try to develop a task response that will sort of suit this idea. But for me as an examiner, the response here is basically, give me your opinion. Is this a positive or negative development? And so that's what we have here in this thesis, is that this essay will. And this is very powerful for me because this tells the examiner basically what you're doing for the topic. It also tells you, the writer, what you need to do. And so when you're sitting in that test room for an hour, and if you got this down in about 3 to 5 minutes, think about how much time you just saved yourself instead of like sort of analyzing and thinking and whatever else, because you didn't think about that. You just looked at the language, and always be language focused in this case. And so this essay will give some examples. And so that means that that's all my paper is going to do, is I have basically told the examiner what to predict in the blocks of the body that I provide here, which is basically some examples as to why I think. And so this is my choice here, right? Why I think this is. And I left them both here because I still want you to decide whether or not it is a positive situation or a negative situation. Notice I did the paraphrase from development to situation, mostly because development is overused by Chinese candidates in Chinese IELTS exams. And so I like to get away from a lot of those things. Again, IELTS is not about what to say, it's also about what not to say. And I think anytime we have a lot of overused sort of collocations, phrases, idioms, whatever else, get rid of them, take them out, because that's what your competition is doing. And if your competition is doing it, they're going to get 5.5. And so you got to be ahead of the competition by doing something different. In this case, we're going to choose a position. And so you may have different feelings, whether or not it's positive or negative. It doesn't matter. IELTS does not care about your feelings. Even if the examiner is smiling, they do not care about you. All they care about is that standardized score so they don't get in trouble. And so don't fall for that. It's definitely about your ability in English for this case. And so if this essay will give some examples as to why it's positive or negative, then this is just a quick moment of reflection. I'm a big fan in IELTS of the rule of 3. This has always been sort of my secret for the exam itself, in the sense that, notice we've got a lot of things here. We've got address 1, phone number 2, and credit card number 3 to facilitate everyday activities such as banking 1, shopping 2, and socializing. Notice that series here is 1, 2, and completed. It's not and so on or etc. or anything or everything. Don't do that. Please be specific with your series 1, 2, and 3. If you can't do 1, 2, and 3, then you're going to need 1 and 2 for sure, and make sure that you use your conjunctions and connectives in the current place. There's a lot of discourse action in here already. We've got things like currently, because we've got a comma clause here. We've got a complex comma clause down here as well, because we have a series. And then we mimic the same idea here. Data related to the residence 1, phone contact 2, details, and even credit or banking, which we've sort of put together here. So would I call this 3 and 4? Well, essentially it's still 3 ideas because we're referring to the same concept. Their day-to-day activities, there you go. We just borrowed it, we changed it. Shopping, managing finances, and even how they socialize. So 1, 2, and 3. 3 is the magic number for developing your ideas. And so when you take a moment here to think about your position, think about it to yourself. Can I come up with 3 positive reasons for this particular situation? Or is it going to be three negative reasons for this situation? Either one is going to be fine. It's just what you can develop with your language. And so the other important part of this aspect is sometimes it's beneficial to counter post maybe what everybody else is doing. And I think most people probably would be mau mau hoo hoo. They'd be in the middle here about the positive and negative because that's how they see it. That's how they perceive it. You have to step out of that thinking. You have to change your way of thinking. Changing your way of thinking is going to allow you to say, oh, I just have to focus on the language. Doesn't really matter. I'm not really needing to solve this problem. It's not a traditional problem that you need to solve for your teacher or for an exam. It's a response. How do you respond to this? And with our strategy for mid-band candidates who are coming in at 5.5, 6, stuck there maybe, and sometimes they stay stuck in this area because they can't make a breakthrough because they're doing the same thing that they've always done and expecting a different result. That's the definition of insanity. It's actually written down that way. So on the other hand, to make that jump, we also have to know what is the difference between 5, 6, and 7 in the writing criteria, the marking criteria. And so we also take a look at that. We even just look at the public band information. All the information for IELTS is available, the true information. Everybody else is out there doing pienza stuff, just taking your money. I'm not interested in doing that. And my biggest thing here is getting people to get their bands and get where they want to go because I believe that's really what the process should be. So if you got three positive reasons here that you can develop, that you think you can control with some language or some ideas, then I would say probably lean towards positive. And so what would be a positive reason to put your personal information online? And one of the things they kind of reveal here in the prompt is people do it for their everyday activities. We become sort of used to that idea. For example, I'm pretty liberal with my personal information, even here in the United States, where we have a lot of fraud of people stealing identities. In fact, my identity's been stolen previously. While I was in China, somebody here in America stole my identity and caused some problems. The good thing is they were much taller than I am, so obviously it wasn't me. And so identity theft is big, and people basically are trying to do several things. One, when they steal your identity, they may be trying to cover up another crime by concealing themselves. They may steal your personal information to just get your banking, to just get your money, to get your credit card, or to open up other accounts or loans or something in your name, and then use your personal information as the guarantee for those loans or money, and then they don't pay them back, and you're responsible for them, and you have to prove that it was not you that did that. And so there's a lot of scams involved with that, especially in my country. There are some in your country as well, but it seems to be better controlled in some ways, and most people are aware uh, of scammers in some cases, except for maybe people that are naive or sometimes older people who get taken advantage of. So the positive again of putting our personal and private information online, you know, one of the first things I can say is people are going to say the term convenience or convenient, and they may confuse those two as they often do for Chinese candidates. And so, again, like development, convenient and convenience is quite overused in the exam. It has been that way for a long time. And so, if you have the word convenient in your Lexis or your vernacular, you may think about changing it or adapting it to something else so you can sound different, which in this case means better than the competition. Because if you sound like everybody else that's getting 5 or 5.5, you also are going to get that score. But if you can come up with a better way to explain this idea of what we consider convenience, in this case, for most people, it's just simply just easy. You've got your phone, you've got your computer, they send you the information, and you just put it online. There it is. If you're lucky, you'll try to secure it somehow, either with your fingerprint or a code or a secure folder, and whatever it is. But I promise you, this last 3 years here in America, I've done so much of my day-to-day activities because of the pandemic on my phone that is actually kind of worrying to me that somebody hasn't stolen my data again, which they have not, because I try to think about what it could be. And so in this case, instead of saying convenient, just say it's easy. It's really easy to do. You have your phone, you've got your information, you can upload it at many different places. There's applications for it and so forth. So aside from being easy, and again, because we don't want to say convenient, what would be the other aspect of why this would be a positive thing to put all of your personal information online? Well, perhaps aside from it being easy, it also makes it very portable. And so notice that this is kind of a unique word here, portable, which means to be able to make it easy to carry around. And so, again, we're always looking for that language that's sort of outside the regular student corpus of things that they say. And portable is something that we don't get a lot from students. And so, to me, that's sort of a good key word. The problem here is don't overuse some of these special words because then they lose their value. For example, phenomenon has been overused by IELTS candidates for quite some time. It's a great word, but you can only really use it once in a 250 word essay unless it's the topic, and it never is. And so be careful about latching onto words because you think they're good or they're strong. Remember, for lexical resource, we are looking for a range of vocabulary. And so a range, of course, is very similar to what we consider as a scale. And so that means the scale is sort of broad from the positive to the negative. If you wanted to do it that way, is fine on the 0 point, but we need to show variation or variety in this case is much better than trying to sort of repeat something like what's the word I'm looking for? Phenomenon again. Sorry, lost my train of thought. That happens often. So it's easy, it's portable. We probably need one other point here because we could develop it that way as well. And so obviously I'm thinking off the top of my head too, like why would I put all my data on there? And when I came to America, why did I do that? And part of it is because the fact that it is easy and portable, it actually is much more secure now than it used to be. For example, we have to use biometric data such as a fingerprinting or even a retina scan or whatever else. And so the security itself has changed for the development of things online. It has gotten better. You can create certain sort of private folders or quick folders for information that may appear for a moment and disappear. And so there's all kinds of aspects that we can say that it might be the case that it could be a positive event, putting all this data, your personal data online, easy, portable, and secure. Three sort of distinct ideas. And then the next thing we want to think about is the progression, which is the other thing we measure here in writing. And the easiest way to determine or set up progression for English in a very small sample like this, and considering that we already have our introduction block because we did our paraphrase of the prompt and turned the directive into a thesis, now we have a couple of ideas here. And because we're not going to fall for the is it positive, is it negative, it's both. We're only doing in this case either positive or negative. We can probably split this into either 4 or 5 blocks. And the only reason why I'm suggesting a 5th block in this case is because we've got 3 distinct ideas. Progression in this case always starts with your biggest idea or the idea that you can speak the most about. And then your secondary idea is going to be sort of your medium idea, your back burner idea. And then, of course, the last one is going to be the smallest detail with some very specific information. So we go from sort of the general to the more exact to the precise in this case. That's the easiest way to demonstrate progression. The problem for IELTS candidates is they go in the test, they get a little bit nervous, they panic, they read the prompt, they try to remember some sort of essay that was similar, they start writing, and they may start here with the smallest idea, and then the biggest idea, and then the medium idea. And so their format or their style or their paragraphing is out of order. And so you get marked down for that. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to avoid pattern errors, doing sort of the same dumb things that everybody else is always doing. How can we avoid that? How can we minimize that percentage so that we can keep our score up there at 6.5 and 7, since that's our target? And that's the key point here, is to set the target, is to know the outcome. And so if we do this as 4 and 5, then it's really easy because the introduction's already been done in a few minutes. And then, if we're going to put this in the same order and say that the biggest idea is it's easy, the medium idea is it's portable and secure, I'm okay with that. It just means that this will probably need a bit more information if we're going to say that this is the priority here is that it's easy, two, it's portable, and three, it's secure. And so we only need a few lines for each of these. If we do our word count here, I'm just guessing this is about 30 words or so. So we need about another 220 words. And so we've got one, two, three, we've got four plus our with our conclusion here. So four goes in 120, 30 words. And so now that's why we call it blocking. We're coming up with a strategy here and say, okay, this next one is approximately going to be about 30 words, which is about three sort of complex compound sentences. You know, it's about 10 words a sentence. There you go. You got 30, 30, 30. And so now you've got sort of a working model here that will allow you to block up the amount of words. Even though we don't do word count anymore, the only reason why I still recommend it is for the structure of formatting for blocking in this case. And so maybe you don't make it a 250, maybe you only make it a 200 or so, but definitely they're a lot shorter than what they used to be. And so again, it's a kind of a trick on the part of the exam that they know that students will sort of take the easy way out. And so that's the case. They will always write less instead of more. And so that was really smart that they took out the word count because that means you got to keep taking the test. And if you keep taking the test, you got to keep paying for them. So they know what they're doing for sure. And so in this case, I would say don't play that game. Try to defeat the boss on the first level here. And in order to do that, we're going to choose these positions. The easiest way to do this is let's branch out. And so what would be the negative of this aspect here? Well, do we want to just make it parallel and just say, well, it's hard to put your data on information online? But actually, that's not really the case now, is it? It's actually not hard. It's actually really easy and it's convenient in this case. And so maybe we can't make sort of a direct correlation for the antonyms here between the opposites. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. In this case, it's sort of not exact in this case. The idea of portability. And so if you don't put all that information, then maybe you've got to carry around a very large wallet or purse that has all of that information in there, like banking information, credit card information, all that stuff. You know, basically you're carrying part of your secure office around with you everywhere you go. Probably that's not great. And so in this case, if we the negative aspect here is the fact that it's not portable, is that you have a lot of information sort of laying around in this case. And so maybe this becomes a storage issue in this case. And so even though electronic storage is getting also smaller and less expensive, again, we can put entire sort of libraries or things that we need on a day-to-day basis onto our phone, which is really powerful. And so we have a lot of storage there. And so that allows us to carry all of this information in sort of a single place. And so if we didn't do that, then we'd have to have some place to put it. And so that could be a storage issue. The other side of this is we could also sort of argue against it being secure. And we could just say it's unsafe. And we'd have to give some examples of what the problem could be. And again, this would be things like identity theft, you know, people stealing money, so forth. So the only other thing is, since we're kind of struggling with this idea, this makes me think that we probably would change the progression if we did a negative. And because we're struggling to fill this out, that might indicate to you like, I probably should stay on the positive side. That's easier for me to talk to. And so you see this big mess here of all my notes. They're just my notes. They're for me, as I'm the only one that's going to read them. Yeah, you're looking at it because it's for the purpose of a demonstration, but the process here is sort of thinking on paper. And so when you go to the exam, notice they give you like a book that you are free to write on, unless they tell you don't write on it. Some test centers do that, but generally speaking, they give you some place to write. And so feel free to write on that material and make a very quick outline, not very long. Don't think too much or think too deeply about this. Try to react as much as you can. And so the challenge for me is I'm having trouble reacting or responding to this counterpoint here is if it's easy to put stuff online, why would it be difficult not to put it online? And I don't necessarily think that it is in this case. And so maybe we could say the idea that it is difficult, just go direct, but we'd have to develop some points as to why it is difficult. And because I'm sort of developing this one last, this really does feel like the more specific or smaller one where I can only have one or two sentences about it directly. And so I might leave this in the back. And so I'll probably give this a number 3 instead of the number 1 for the block here. So now if I think about which are the two bigger ideas here that makes it negative, I'm probably actually going to focus on it being unsafe and explain a lot about the reasons why it is unsafe to do these things. If someone wants to harm you, they can find you online and go to your house. If someone wants to harass you or try to spam you or trick you or con you or sell you something, they can get your phone number online and harass you. And then the last part of this, of course, is that you've got all of this information sitting in an office somewhere, whether it's your tax information, your banking information. Where do you store all that? How long do you store it? How many boxes and piles of paper are you going to keep? It's another reason why we try to go paperless as much as possible. Sometimes it's difficult, though, because you miss information. So in this case, I'm probably going to change my progression here, and I'm going to start with it being unsafe. I'm going to complain about the storage, and then I'm going to end up with the difficulty. So notice we're going in a different direction here. And so again, it takes a little bit of pre-planning, but we don't need much in the sense that what we do need in this case is to be able to get on the paper with this first paragraph. If you can get that down to 5 minutes, you'll be surprised like how much more you can get done. And again, task 2 is worth 60% of the overall writing mark. You need to decide for yourself, are you a task 1 expert in the sense that you got pretty good usage at 6.5 to 7? Or are you sort of hoo-hoo in this case, and maybe you're a task 1 expert? And again, if you get a really high score in task 1, which is only 150 words, and it's just a report, doesn't require a lot of creative component or thinking or analysis, some people do that. They really focus on task 1 and try to get them to come in at 7.5 or 8. So that pulls this one down. If it's hoo at 5.5 or 6, it'll pull it up to 6.5 because this is so high. So you need to determine for yourself, where is your expertise? Are you better at responding to topics this way in English? Or are you better reporting on topics in task 1 in this case? And there's only one way to find it, and that's to use the Nike method for English, which is just to do it. You have to write, you have to speak, you have to read, and you have to listen. Anything outside of that for the materials, you're wasting your time. There is no secret, there is no magic cure. It is actually hard work. And so take that under consideration when you decide that you really want to excel at IELTS. Because if you're just playing around like it's a hobby and it's easy because people say English is easy, trust me, you'll be stuck at 5.5 for quite a while. On the other hand, if you take a look at the material here and begin to sort of look at it objectively and somewhat subjectively in this case, but make some objectives for yourself for your study of IELTS. And one of the things that most people miss is the idea of timing when they set their goal here, is the fact that all of the exam is under time. And so if you are writing for practice, you should do it like the exam. You should give yourself 60 minutes and only 60 minutes and try to produce your raw sample of task 1 and task 2. And the first few times you may fail to do that. And so you have to analyze, why is it that I cannot write less than 500 words in an hour? Is it because I don't know what I'm writing about? Is it because I don't know what to say? Is it a structure issue? There's all these different things that can be somewhat problematic. And it's only by the practice can we set objectives to ourselves. And so once you do the writing and it gets marked by someone like myself, who can get you pretty close to what the standard mark would be for the real test, that's a good indicator of saying what is the problem in your writing, aside from the timing. And so you can design an objective for that and say, okay, I'm taking the test in 6 weeks from now. Okay, so if it's 6 weeks from now, great, is when you're going to take the official test. Maybe you took the test in the past and you didn't do so well. Maybe your previous band was around overall 5. Maybe you got a 5 in or 5.5 in speaking, like most people, and maybe your writing was probably somewhere in this area as well. Maybe listening and reading was a little bit higher because you can use some memory work there. But for production skills, no, you can't memorize everything. You have to be able to deal with it in real time. And so if you're at 5.5 and you got about 6 weeks, normally the British Council recommends about 80 hours per band. Well, okay. And so if it's 80 hours per band, the only problem is you've got 4 test papers. And so if you're still somewhere stuck at 5 and you got to get to 7, that's really 2 bands. And so it's not 80 hours in this case. Now you're looking at 160 hours. All right. And then if you are in different areas of the test, if it's all 4 areas, then you have to think about all 4 of these in this case. And so now you're talking about over 600 hours. But I'm not talking about 600 hours of class. What I'm talking about here is 600 hours of basically dedicated study to the process over the next 6 weeks to improve your IELTS from 5 to 7. And so if we think it is going to be something like 600 hours for all of these exams together, sorry, that's 6,000. And so if it's 600 hours and we said 6 weeks, then you're talking approximately 100 hours a week, which would include a class with someone like myself for maybe 2 to 4 to 6 hours because you need direct, exact information. And then the remaining time is all of the other resource or practice work, where most students don't do that because I'm not there or the teacher's not there to say, hey, you need to do that. And so the willingness to do it on your own is another part of this that is important to conquer. Okay, you got 100 hours per week in this case. And so again, objectively thinking, you got 7 days a week. So 7 goes into 100. Well, what is it? 10, 37, about 15 hours a week. That's not too bad if you think about it. It's a little bit more than that. Obviously, 4 times 15 in this case would be 15 to 15, 30, 30 more. What do you think that is? So 7 goes into 10 one time. You got 3 left over, 30. 7 goes into 30. Yeah, it's about that. And so if you think about 15 hours a week per study, is that doable? How many hours is that per day? And so that's really only about 2 hours per day. But working smarter and working harder is really 2 different things. And so I have students that study IELTS all day long for many weeks. They don't get any progress because they're not studying smarter, they're studying harder. They're trying to memorize IELTS material instead of working with the material in a way that it becomes functional, where you understand the functions. So out of this 2 hours per day, what would you do with that? Well, I would suggest to you, if you had a class with someone like me for 2 hours, that you would actually study for another 2 hours beyond that. And so now you're actually talking about 4 hours per day. And if you're going to do it for 6 weeks, so 7 times 4 is 28. And then you got your 6 hours here. And so 6 times 8 is 48. Boom. 6 times 2, of course, is 12. And 4, you got 168 hours. And so now it's a huge difference from your original plan. So what's missing? It's the self-study time. And I will tell you that most students don't do enough self-study. They don't do enough reading. They don't do enough writing. They definitely don't do enough speaking. And they have all the excuses for it. If candidates spent as much time as they think about getting out of the exam and getting out of homework as they actually could put that energy into it, they'd be a lot farther ahead. Until that point, again, you can hit us up here on WeChat. You can find out more about what we do, how we do it, when we do it, will we do it, and our success with other students in the past who are all over the world. I'm Dr. IELTS, and I am always here to sort of help folks because I like to see people conquer IELTS. I think that's important in this case, mostly because I think people should be able to go and study where they want to study and study what they want to study and try to set their life forward like the rest of us that are so lucky doing what we love. For me, that's teaching. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening. I hope it helps somehow. And if you have any questions, again, you can contact us right here at WeChat. Thank you very much. Cheers.